This episode is brought to you by Upsonder, the easiest way to monetize your drone. With the industry's only $1 million protection coverage free to its members, Upsonder is the top choice among certified drone pilots to get up and stay up. To get started, create your free listing today at upsonder.com. Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everybody, and welcome to Commercial Drones FM. You might notice already that the sound is a little bit different because I actually don't have my recording equipment with me here, but today I'm with Ryan Mack, who's a staff writer at Forbes, and we're here in San Francisco at Forbes HQ. Thank you very much for letting me borrow this recording equipment. We're going to be talking about today a really cool and interesting subject. Ryan Mack just wrote a really nice article, very intriguing article titled "Behind the Crash of 3D Robotics, North America's Most Promising Drone Company." And that was released, I believe, on October, the 5th here. So he also, just a really quick note, he co-wrote the article with Aaron Tilley, who actually is ill. So get well soon, Aaron. We wish you could have been here with us. So I'm sitting here once again with Ryan Mack. So thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. My pleasure. So you've written, so just a little bit of background. You've actually written two, so my list of favorite drone industry articles is very, very, very small because most of them aren't very, super intriguing. They don't have a lot of editorial panache to them. So you've written two of my favorite ones. One is the one we're talking about specifically today, the 3D robotics one, but also the article with Frank Wang, actually, and of DJI. So those were two really cool ones. So how did you get started in journalism, and how did you get started covering drones?
Sure. So I worked at Forbes for about almost 5 years now, and always in the SF Bureau, so covering the technology industry in Silicon Valley as a whole. And I write a lot about Amazon. And so when...
The company.
Amazon, the company, right? And when Jeff Bezos started talking about drones, if everyone remembers that 60 Minutes piece where he showed off these drones right before the holidays, I think in 2013. And everyone freaked out and said, like, oh my God, drones are going to be the next delivery mechanism. Like, we're going to see these things all over the place. I don't think I ever bought into the hype, but it certainly got me intrigued as to this industry and what that meant. And at that time, I think consumer drones had just begun coming to the forefront of, you started seeing phantoms every now and then in the air. And so that intrigued me. And the next logical step for me at that point in time was to think, well, what's the biggest company right now in this drone space? And that's how I eventually arrived at DJI and realized that this was a Chinese company in Shenzhen that very little people had written about. There's not many people covering the drone space. And when you're a journalist and you find an uncovered story, that's definitely something that you want to go after. And so we spent a lot of time kind of reporting out that story, sent a colleague over to China to interview him in Chinese. And that was that was how that came about. And ever since, I've been kind of covering the space.
Oh, that's awesome. When was that, with the Frank Wang interview?
I want to say that idea started as a kind of kernel in early 2015, I believe. Okay. Prior to them taking investment from Excel, which is the Silicon Valley venture capital firm.
Is that like $100 million or something?
Yeah, $100 million at like an $8 billion valuation. And so this is a company that literally came out of nowhere. Not many people had heard about them, and they're arriving at an $8 billion valuation. And that alone, I think that was in our story. I think that was a large part of our story, and that really put them on the map. And we were able to time like our reporting with that occurrence.
Wow,
yeah,
that's crazy. It's hard to, or it's not hard. It's just impressive to realize back in like 2015 they were already valued at such a high valuation.
Yeah,
$8 billion.
I mean, when you're doing $1 billion in sales, it's not hard to get there. So
that's true. We don't get a lot of people don't get a lot of like insight into how well they're selling. But I mean, the reason why we're talking about this, of course, is because you've reported on DJI, which we'll probably talk about a little bit more, but also because
DJI, whether we like it or not, played probably a very pivotal role. And there was actually quotes in the story that you had written before the 3DR fall story, or the crash of 3DR story, from Frank Wang, talking about how he beat them when they were small and he'll beat them when they were bigger. So it's kind of come to fruition. So how did you come across this 3D robotics story? I mean, why did you write it, or what event, was there an event that triggered this?
So what's interesting is actually the first time I ever thought about 3DR was actually in reporting the DJI piece, because in reporting on DJI, you want to think of the competitors in the space. You want to know what the space looks like, and you want to look, and naturally you want to know what the largest company in the US is if you're a US-based reporter. And so I arrived at 3DR. I obviously talked to people at Parrot, but you soon realize that 3DR is kind of leading the way, and this was back in March 2015. And so I remember that meeting with Chris, because it's the lead of this story that we published a couple weeks ago. Chris Anderson, right, the CEO of 3D Robotics, CEO and co-founder. And we talked about drones on that day and kind of discussed the opportunity, the quote-unquote blue sky opportunity. There's no drones in the air right now, but in a couple years there may be dozens of these devices doing multiple different tasks for different companies and different use cases.
Commercial uses.
Right. And I remember that vividly, that kind of discussion. The story in DJI kind of framed DJI versus 3DR and how that would play out in the consumer drone space and selling drones to your average person who wants it for Christmas. Fast forward a year later, I started taking a look back at 3DR and realized, well, they're not really doing too hot. This company that was at 350 employees a year ago maybe has 50 people working for it. Everyone's left. Sales aren't great. Their devices are on heavy discount.
300, it's like $300 and something like right now,
so actually,
to buy a Solo.
When we were writing the story, it was at $500 with a gimbal at Best Buy, and the day after the story, I think it dropped to $400 with a gimbal, and now it's $375 with the free gimbal. So yeah, and these were devices that were selling for more than $1,500 when it first came out.
So the gimbal is actually a really, really important part of this entire narrative, because from what I understand and what I know and experience is DJI, one of the reasons why they became so dominant was because of their mastery or innovation in the gimbal technology, making it so easy to use, making it so you don't have to, I came from, setting my own PIDs on the gimbal and programming my own and doing, setting all the settings and getting it all right. But DJI came out with I forget what it's called, something 3D, whatever the gimbal name was. And then that really revolutionized things. And fast forwarding to the release of the Solo, when you bought one, when it was announced, you couldn't even get the gimbal because it was like 2 months delayed or something. And then whenever 3D Robotics did release the gimbal for the Solo and allow it to be purchased or shipped out, people had to physically install it. So I remember watching the video with Colin Gwynn, who's explaining how to easily, quote unquote, easily install your 3D Robotics Solo gimbal, and it was just almost anything but easy. So that was those two moments are I guess important things to note.
I think anyone listening to this podcast knows that 90 to 99% of drones are used for imaging, visualization purposes. And Frank Wang realized that very early. In fact, he knows that his secret sauce was in his 3-axis gimbal and not the Phantom per se. And so when the Solo shipped without the gimbal, I think it was like a 2 or 2.5 month lag. I remember them shipping with that kind of plastic holder for the GoPro camera, and you would, if you remember that, the little mount, the little mount that you just had, and I just remember the people that actually bought it were just so uninspired by that, because you could go out and buy this cheaper Phantom, which was only $1,400 at the time, compared to their $1,700 price point if you had to buy a GoPro with it. And you had this working gimbal on the Phantom. Meanwhile, you had this kind of fixed plastic mount on a Solo, and so there was nothing. Everything that they had promised with their smart shot and everything, you couldn't do that. So
at the launch.
Yeah, it's a classic case of overpromising and underdelivering, I think.
I think that's a trend in the drone industry. I mean, you see companies like Lily, who overpromised and I think are still yet to deliver. I mean, missing deadlines and things is one thing, but having the technology just not work as you described it is another. And so, I mean, it's in the video game industry too. If you look at like a company called Hello Games doing No Man's Sky that like has like the worst Steam rating ever now after release, and like so many people bought it. I mean, you can't really get away with that kind of stuff in this day and age. I don't think it was intentional. They had, by all means, they meant to release this correctly and on time, but maybe they just underestimated their ability to do so.
Right.
So getting all of the information behind this story. So in the actual story on the website on Forbes.com, it says that you guys had access or got access to, I forget how many
about
ex-employees of 3D Robotics.
Well, so we contacted probably anywhere from, I'd say, more than 30. A lot of folks didn't want to talk at the time for whatever reason. I don't know if they signed NDAs, but I mean, a lot of people just don't want to talk about a bad experience if they had one. We managed to, over the period of a couple months, talk to, I think, 10 former employees, and then as well as Chris Anderson himself.
Oh, okay.
And so that helped us shape kind of the clear picture of what was going on.
Yeah, I was wondering when I was reading the stories if the quotes like were from current Chris Anderson or from past. So you contacted him, and I guess you guys were just like, "Hey, we're writing a story on this."
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. Obviously, the beginning quote was from a year ago because that was when we were talking a year ago. In the reporting process, somehow he had gotten wind that we were asking questions about certain things, and he actually reached out to us. And we had a phone conversation. We then put together like an email list of questions that we emailed to him later on in the process, so to follow up. And he declined to comment on those after. I guess you kind of get an understanding of where the article is going if you're seeing those types of questions.
Yeah, totally. Well, he came from the journalism industry himself, so I'm sure he's definitely noticed where that was going. So, okay, so Chris Anderson did contribute to the story.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So how long was this process?
Yeah.
When did you guys, are we talking 6 months or?
I think this has been an idea for me since probably the end of the holiday season last year. So, I saw kind of some of the sale numbers, saw that a lot of the players had taken a hit. Even DJI didn't have a great holiday season last year. And so I wondered kind of where does that leave someone like 3DR? And in March, I had heard rumblings that people were going to get laid off, and there was that layoff story. And so I kept an eye on it. I actually kind of wanted to do the story earlier, but some things came up. And throughout the summer, we saw people leaving. I saw a lot of people changing their employment on LinkedIn, which is not a good sign. So basically a lot of the C-suite leaving, whether that was, first it was a CFO, the COO had changed a couple times, the Jivan, who was named president, stepped down, and then Colin Gwynn, who is the chief revenue officer out of Austin and a former DJI exec, also left in September. And so that's not usually a good sign if you're a successful company. I mean, if you're
never a good sign.
It's never a good sign.
I think there was an email that leaked out too that was circulated.
Right. That was in March, I think. Okay. That was when those layoffs were reported. And I was keeping an eye on it too, and I didn't think it was the right time to do a story like this because you don't really have a clear picture. And I think people continue to leave after that point.
Yeah, I would imagine there were some people that weren't laid off that saw some bad news and saw the ominous clouds forming. So what was like the general sentiment of most of the most of the people? Was it like neutral, mostly negative, some positive, high notes? I'm sure, like, obviously.
I think it was almost this kind of bittersweet feeling. We talked to employees from all the offices, so that included Austin, Berkeley, the headquarters, folks from San Diego and Tijuana, and actually that was a kind of interesting thing we didn't really mention in the article, but the fact that there were so many offices led to a lot of conflict in the company.
Take note, drone startups.
Or any startup, it's hard to communicate across that many people, across that many offices. But the sentiment was, I mean, this was a company that had raised $100 million, the most well-funded drone startup in the country. And there was a lot of promise here. There were a lot of smart people, a lot of people that really wanted to do something dramatic and move this industry forward. And do things that Chris Anderson did talk about in his keynote speeches at these conferences. And it just came down to mismanagement, failed projections, a lot of internal strife as well that just ruined what was a very promising company in probably less than 18 months. I mean, the collapse was pretty quick.
Are you allowed to say if you had any of the previous executives that you guys were able to interview? Or
I shouldn't say who the sources were.
Definitely don't want any names, obviously.
Yeah.
Just curious how deep the knowledge went. Well, either way, I mean, I think it's still super interesting, and it's definitely, if not, 100 and completely 100%, like have the whole story, at least quite a bit of it from underneath the tip of the iceberg.
A telling sign actually of the sentiment here is we actually received a lot of folks that didn't want to talk to us. They said like, oh, great piece that captured a lot of what I was feeling and
after it was published.
Right, after it was published.
Okay.
We had people that contacted us that we didn't reach out to at all. That said like that was accurate and appreciate you writing this and telling the story. And so that gave me a kind of a good sense that we were at least like fair and balanced. I mean, and tried to like capture the right atmosphere here of what happened.
Oh, that's good feedback from the journalistic standpoint, for sure. So throughout 150 layoffs, over $100 million in VC funding, what was the most intriguing part of this story to you, if you can pick something specifically?
Yeah. I think the most intriguing thing for me, I thought when I was reporting this, the fact that DJI tried to come in and buy 3DR was one of the more like jaw-dropping things for me. So there was a conversation between Frank Wang, the CEO of DJI, and Chris Anderson at 3DR's headquarters in Berkeley, right before Solo had launched, and there was an offer put on the table, and Chris declined, according to some folks that saw that meeting happen.
Yeah.
That was very interesting to me. Some of the inside baseball kind of stuff too, the idea that they were pursuing other projects beyond the Solo. There was a mini Solo that was on the docket, as well as a kind of larger industrial Solo that was more of an enterprise play that was on the docket and slated to be built out. But
that could have been really interesting if that was actually pushed
forward.
And
they didn't have enough money. Like they had sunk everything into the manufacturing of Solo 1. And so I think that was a surprise for me. The $100 million is so much money if you're a startup. I mean, that's a lot of money and the fact that the majority of that was sunk into the cost of manufacturing Solo, and how quickly that tanked the company is one that's something I just couldn't wrap my head around initially.
Of the $100 million in VC funding, what percentage of that do you think went to the filming of the monkey video? I mean, those monkeys must have had pretty high salaries.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that was discussed. That was a pretty amazing video, but it seemed like it was insanely, like almost unnecessarily expensive to film that launch video of the Solo. And it was like at least 7, 8 minutes long, something
Yeah.
like that. It was a nice piece of videography.
Yeah. I think the marketing game is one that that Colin tried to mimic after coming from DJI. I mean, and there was so much marketing to build up 3DR, and it almost copied the DJI America playbook, as well as like stuff they were seeing from GoPro, like having these like very dramatic, very big videos that would kind of go viral on social networks. But yeah, I don't know how much money was spent on those things.
DJI, what kind of? I'm trying to think of like viral DJI videos.
I mean, I think those were like user-generated content, like the stuff like, and then they would kind of push like whether that's like the photos of like a whale from above, just like I don't know, those early drone videos that I just remember being shared throughout networks. I think was something that comes to mind. Yeah,
I'm a little jaded now when it comes to aerial videos. It has to be really good to get my attention because there's just so much out there.
Remember the guy that flew? Like there was several that flew over volcanoes with like early Phantoms, or it might have even been Inspire. But I think just some of those videos were kind of truly breathtaking.
Yeah,
and
that's
I think
true.
those are.
You can't like do like. I don't know, like I'm just thinking, okay, if I'm looking DJI versus 3D Robotics, like who makes the best aerial videos? Which marketing team does the best ones?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like, it's like you can't even really, if you look at them now, it's like they just look the same. So I guess it's all in the how you spin it kind of thing.
Right. Which actually speaks to like the idea of like the commoditization of these things. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a user, you don't really care how you're getting the video. It's if you're getting, like, it's what kind of video you're getting. And if everyone's providing the same content, I guess, for the same quality, you're gonna buy the cheapest thing on the market.
Here's a thought. So after doing this story and doing this research on 3D robotics, there's a little company called GoPro, and they just released their first foray into the drone industry. As a hobbyist, more targeted very heavily in their marketing towards hobbyists. I don't think there's a single mention of like a commercial aspect unless you are literally like selling your surfing videos or whatever, surfing pictures. Obviously, they must have paid attention to the 3D robotics story, and I'm sure there's plenty of people at GoPro who read your article on the crash of 3D robotics. Do you think that there's a lot of things that GoPro has learned from this, or I mean, looking from the inside of developing this story? I guess I'm just trying to maybe I'm trying to say in more words than none is GoPro going to end up like 3D robotics battling DJI? So
there's a couple things there, and actually the connections between the two companies is there's a lot of connections. The head of Karma came from 3DR.
Oh, interesting.
This guy named Pablo Lima, who was in a lot of the Karma launch videos. He actually was a 3DR, I think engineer, product manager. I forgot what his position was, but he was poached from 3DR. And of course, there was the relationship between the two companies. When Solo launched, they had actually integration with the GoPro, so GoPro cameras. So
yeah, that's right.
If you remember, you could control your GoPro camera and its settings from your Solo in your Solo app, and that was something that was marketed. So like I think on the box
development.
Yeah, on the boxes of the Solo, it's like, oh, it works with GoPro, and I think that was like one of the few outside like hardware integrations that GoPro did.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of connections between the companies. Whether 3DR learned or GoPro learns from 3DR, I don't know. I think the story may have come out a little too late for them. But I mean, GoPro has another side of its business selling those action cameras and accessories and stuff. And so I think it has its reputation for innovation, relying on how successful its drone is. But I don't know if necessarily its business relies on, because they can still sell cameras and they can still sell accessories, but I don't know if a drone will completely collapse GoPro.
What's Frank Wang like? Is he completely ruthless? because I mean, a new competitor enters. Like player 2 has entered the arena now, or player 3, and so I mean, after being involved in the interview process with Frank Wang, I would imagine, this is just me, that he is like ready to just shut them down.
So it's actually interesting. I've never actually met Frank Wang, and we sent my Chinese-speaking counterpart and colleague to go interview him in Mandarin, because that's what he's most comfortable in. But I saw the transcripts, and we've actually, the stuff that didn't make the story excerpt into a longer Q&A, which is online. And he says some pretty interesting things about competitors. I mean, you got to remember, this is a guy he's been in the industry longer than anyone else. He's probably had like a 3 or 4 year head start. And so he's seen everything. He's been able to make all these missteps. And he's able to see like, I mean, the other problems that these companies will have. So a company could come charging in pretty hard with a lot of money, and he'll predict that, oh, they won't be around in a couple of years because they'll hit this problem, or we have manufacturing advantages over them, and the guy's just an extremely, extremely hard worker. I mean, DJI is known for having a culture where people stay very late. I mean, his office actually has a bed in it, in a side room, and this is something I think it was in our story, but yeah, he has this bed he sleeps in if he doesn't want to go home at 3 a.m. after working on his next project or whatever. So this is a guy that is tenacious. He idolizes Steve Jobs, and he wants to be kind of the Chinese Steve Jobs of drones.
I think a lot of what the public really learned about DJI and the psyche of Frank Wang actually came from your article. And I know now that I'm sitting here talking to you, I know that I'm referencing like these stories that I know, like, DJI has such, they played a huge role in this story. And Frank Wang behind the scenes in his own mind was like, obviously talking about, that he was quoted as saying, when we were small, we beat 3D robotics, and when we're big, we'll still beat 3D robotics. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, but.
And remember, when he says they were small, I mean, they were still much larger than 3D robotics.
Yeah.
I mean, they were doing tens of millions of dollars or $hundreds of millions in sales when 3D robotics was like hiring its first set of engineers, right? So it's like.
So it was because everyone just like compared 3D robotics to DJI, and so now it's going to be like, oh, well, GoPro or maybe Parrot. This just gets like deeper and deeper, and.
I think the lesson to take away is if you're going against DJI head on, it's going to be very, very tough. There's manufacturing advantages. There's
prototypes hot off, literally like warm in their hands whenever they're getting them from the factories and like testing it out. Like, the Mavic Pro that they just released is just incredible. I can't even, I mean, so I did a couple podcasts on, I did the GoPro launch and I kind of like dissected that and analyzed it. And then I did the Mavic launch a week later. And the technology that they have in there, I'm looking mostly from a commercial perspective, at least regards to the podcast and what my day job is. But like the technology in that 3-axis gimbal that made them so powerful and allowed them to do such great things is insanely shrunken down. And I was shocked that it was actually 3-axis. I thought it was, from the leaked images, maybe the Mavic Pro will actually have a 2-axis gimbal. Turned out to be 3-axis. Totally blows my mind. They've got Movidius chips in there who Intel just bought back in September that I just realized after reading your article and seeing some more Intel announcements. The Movidius acquisition from Intel, they just released their Ascending Technologies Falcon 8 rebranded drone. But yeah, the technology in the Mavic Pro is just ridiculous. So if someone really wants to compete with DJI, what do they have to do?
Yeah. And you almost want to think, I think I saw those announcements, and when you're press, you kind of get a heads up on these announcements ahead of time. And you almost think like DJI just kind of wanted to let GoPro announce first, and then steal the thunder a week later, smaller drone,
more features,
cheaper, more
better
features,
price, available first, cancel your pre-order.
Exactly.
Hey, it comes out in 2 days from when we're recording this, actually. That's cool. So people will start receiving theirs. I know other people have already started getting
Even the Phantom 4 launch was timed, because originally the GoPro drone was supposed to come out earlier. Karma was supposed to come out earlier. And if you look at the timing of, I had this conspiracy theory that DJI timed its Phantom 4 launch to beat Karma to market when it was originally supposed to go. And so when that didn't happen, I don't know, they had Mavic as their ace in the hole, I guess, but that's my kind of conspiracy theory.
Draw your own conclusions, folks.
Yeah.
I mean, this is masterwork of strategic business competition here. I mean, the whole story, I just love it. It's so juicy and great. Lots of drama and excitement, because that's what we love is drones. So, general thoughts on the commercial side of the things. I mean, what stories as a journalist yourself, professional journalist, what stories intrigue you most about the drone industry these days? Is it more of like the business side of things, or like the use cases of drones, or I was looking at your bio, and you previously, or maybe you still do, like the world billionaires and Forbes 400 lists. I mean, what's your style here? What's your
I don't even know anymore. I think it's like I like to find stories that are undercovered. And given that I'm here, there's so much in Silicon Valley that isn't written about. And I tend to focus on like companies and how they're doing. If it's DJI and no one's written about them and they're crushing it, you want to write about that. If it's 3DR and no one's written about it and they're not doing well, you want to write about it. So it's kind of that, I get this hunger to do stories that are uncovered, whether that's a drone story or not a drone story. I don't know. I hope, is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah, totally.
I don't know. I mean, my thought process with stories is kind of funny. Within the drone space, I remember interviewing Henri Seydoux, the CEO of Parrot, and a year ago he predicted I think this is the headline of a story I wrote online. 2016 will be a bloody year for the drone industry, and he predicted that like spot on. Like, his company took a pretty massive hit with its drone sales this year. Look what happened to 3DR. And so I don't know if there's going to be more stories like this. I don't know if I probably shouldn't tip my hand too much, but yeah, I don't know if there's other companies that don't make it, or companies that are bought, or companies that pivot.
Delaire Tech, my old employer, where I actually met Henri Seydoux there, because the Parrot had actually invested in in Delaire Tech. He's a smart guy, super. I mean, he's not the CEO and founder of a super successful consumer electronics company for nothing. Continuing to push. Was that your article? Maybe I read your article. Did you do a piece on him, like specifically on him?
No, it wasn't on him.
Okay, so
it was with an interview where he kind of, the headline was like, it was such a juicy headline. It was like, Parrot. Here, I just brought it up. Parrot CEO predicts bloody year ahead for drone companies.
Was that yours?
That was in November 2015.
Ooh.
So almost a year ago.
You're gonna have to give me some tips on how to write really juicy headlines.
Right?
I sit there for like
That's all
10
I think
minutes
about.
trying to like write the headline of a podcast. So this one, I don't know. I'm gonna draw some inspiration from your very nice headline, Behind the Crash of 3D Robotics, North America's most promising drone company.
Yeah.
That is a nice headline. Awesome, man. So, do you own a drone yourself?
Yeah, I kind of so I always get like things to test out. So I kind of rotate now and then.
Oh, nice. You get to, but you ever do like the reviews on them, or you just?
No,
kind of
I don't
test
do
them out?
reviews.
Okay.
Sometimes we get stuff that people send, and we sometimes do reviews. And but yeah, right now, what am I flying? I think I have like a Bebop.
Oh, okay. Parrot Bebop.
Yeah.
Nice.
But I'm not a big like collector of these things.
Yeah.
I think it's I'm a journalist, so I don't have any money, and I can't afford these things.
San Francisco journalist.
But I don't know. Maybe I'll go get in solo now because it's like $370.
So I guess my last question would be: so I was just thinking about this. Did you ever, once your story is out, like okay, you did the Frank Wang story, you did the 3D Robotics story. We already heard that you received some feedback that kind of acknowledged, hey, you captured the essence of what we were feeling. Nice job, tip of the hat. Did you ever hear from like Frank Wang after your story, or did you ever get any like positive
No, we didn't.
reinforcement?
In fact, I kind of heard from someone that he didn't like the story, which I think is fine if you don't like the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't like some of the characterizations of that piece, but
maybe we'll get him on the podcast.
Yeah, maybe. He speaks English too, is from what I know. So
excellent. Yeah.
You should reach out. I don't know what his PR people will say.
I think I'd have to go through about 12 layers of the onion just to get to his.
He rarely travels outside of. I don't know how much he travels, but he's known to stay within China mostly.
Wow.
I mean, he doesn't do like the company events or anything.
Yeah. No, he doesn't go up on stage and do all the announcement. Michael Perry kind of handles that. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for giving us some of the backstory on both of those stories and some of the other stories. I'll definitely be watching to see what you come out with next. Really want to keep in touch on that kind of stuff. And if you guys want to keep in touch with Ryan as well, you can follow him on Twitter at RMAC, RMAC, and the number 18, RMAC18. What's Forbes Twitter? Is it just at Forbes?
At Forbes, yeah, I think. Hopefully we own that handle. Yeah, it's at Forbes.
You can check out at Forbes as well if you want to check out some other stories. But if you want to follow the podcast, follow us at Drones Podcast on Twitter or facebook.com/Drones Podcast. Give us your feedback. Shoot me some questions. Maybe I can get some stuff answered if there were some loose ends, and I can hit up Ryan and see if we can get to the bottom of some more stuff here. But hopefully we can have you back on the show at some point. Thanks everybody for listening. Any last thoughts, Ryan, before we go ahead and cut off the mics?
No, just tweet at me with any good stories or any ideas. I'm always happy to hear ideas.
Do you go to any of the drone conferences or anything?
Sometimes. I find them sometimes to be repetitive in their speaker lineups. So.
Yeah, that's true. I'm going to be at the Commercial UAV Expo, so if you're there in Vegas, I'll see you.
Okay.
If not, no worries. Cool. Well, hey, everybody, fly safe. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Cheers.
Take care, guys.
When you come crash into me, and I come into you, and I come into you.